Good Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Vicki Wynn. Right now on Morning News Now, new urgency. Evacuation flights back on in Afghanistan. Just hours after twin suicide bombings that left dozens dead, including 13 U.S. troops. President Biden issuing a warning to the terrorists responsible for the attacks.
We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
The latest on the fallout as thousands struggle to flee with the deadline to withdraw now just 4 days away. Enemy of the Taliban, an Islamic State terror group, says it is responsible for yesterday's attacks. So who is ISISK? What we know about the group threatening the safety of evacuees in Afghanistan. In his own words, the police lieutenant who shot and killed a woman during the Capitol Hill riot, he's now out of hiding and sharing his side of the story. His exclusive interview with NBC's own Lester Holt, and why he says his actions help save countless lives. And new this morning, eviction notice, hundreds of thousands of people now at risk of becoming homeless after the Supreme Court blocks the CDC's ban on evictions during the pandemic. Plus, parents going head-to-head over whether their kids should mask up in the classroom. We'll take you to one school district where the debate has taken center stage. We begin this morning, though, with breaking news out of Afghanistan, where evacuations are frantically resuming following yesterday's deadly twin suicide attacks outside Kabul airport.
Yeah, the initial blast came at the airport's Abbey Gate and was soon followed by another explosion nearby at the Baron Hotel. ISIS is claiming responsibility for the attacks, believed to have been conducted by an affiliate in Afghanistan known as ISISK. The attack came hours after the U.S. and other allies warned of an imminent terror threat. 95 civilians were killed, according to the Associated Press, and more than 140 injured. The Pentagon says 13 U.S. service members have also lost their lives in what was the deadliest day for U.S. troops in Afghanistan since 2011. President Biden vowed to retaliate with force.
To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
We have a team of correspondents covering this story from every angle around the globe. Ali Arouzi, Josh Letterman, Ali Vitale, and Ken Delaney, all standing by to bring us the latest on this story. Good morning to all of you. Let's start with Ali Arouzi in Tehran. So, Ali, these attacks targeted thousands of people gathered outside Kabul airport. What's the situation like on the ground today, and how are the evacuations progressing in the wake of this?
Good morning, Joe. Well, it's an extraordinary set of circumstances on the ground in Afghanistan, and it's far from ideal for U.S. service members having to rely on the Taliban, an enemy that they've been fighting for 20 years, to provide them with security against ISIS, really underscoring how precarious the situation is. Nonetheless, the evacuation flights from Afghanistan have resumed with a new sense of urgency as the U.S. says further attempted attacks are expected ahead of Tuesday's deadline. Well, not only U.S. troops are set to leave, but international troops are set to leave as well. General McKenzie, the head of CENTCOM, yesterday said that there is an active threat stream at the airport against U.S. forces. So they've beefed up their security and they're taking the whole situation even more seriously than they were. Look, Joe, the bottom line here is that the longer U.S. troops are on the ground, the higher the possibility of another attack against them. Yesterday's bombing was the deadliest day for U.S. forces since August 2011, and they don't want another scenario like that. So efforts are being made to expedite the evacuation as quickly as possible.
Ali, we know ISIS is claiming responsibility for the explosions. How is the Taliban reacting to that? Is there any indication they will investigate?
Well, they said they will. I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact, Joe, that even though the Taliban and ISIS are very fundamental groups that have a very strict interpretation of Sharia law, they're also arch enemies. They've had running battles in Afghanistan since 2015, trying to get the upper hand on one another. And the Taliban don't want them there right now. The Taliban's main objective is to get U.S. troops out of Afghanistan so they can govern the country the way they want to. So they've said that they want to investigate. They say they want to find the culprits. There's certainly been reports that some of the ISIS people that were in those prisons the doors were flung open to were dealt with quite harshly by the Taliban. So they're definitely not going to want these guys to be around. But we've seen it's easy for the Taliban to take somewhere over, not so easy for them to govern, as we've seen with the chaos over the last 2 weeks around the airport.
And Ali, quickly, you touched on this, but could this be just the start of these types of attacks? What's the likelihood of more?
Well, that's the big fear, Joe, that this is only the tip of the iceberg, that people like ISISK, who are so violent, are going to use this opportunity of chaos in Afghanistan to strike American forces, American civilians, as much as they can before they leave there. General McKenzie warned that this may happen again. He also said that this is the MO of groups like ISIS to conduct wave after wave of attacks. So people are bracing themselves again for the worst possible situation till Tuesday or beyond, when everybody gets out of there.
All right, Ali Arouzi. Ali, thanks for your reporting. Appreciate it.
Let's bring in Josh Letterman and Ali Vitali now for more reaction from Washington. And Josh, I want to start with you. As we heard earlier, the president vowing to hit back at those responsible for these suicide attacks. What else is he saying? And is there confidence the administration has some level of control over this situation?
Well, the White House called yesterday the worst day of President Biden's young presidency. And I can tell you from here at the White House, it certainly had that feeling throughout the day and even heading into today. The president, in those solemn remarks yesterday, tried to display the kind of empathy that he's well known for, but that, frankly, a lot of his critics had said had been lacking over the last couple of weeks, given the situation facing all of these Afghan allies and Americans trying to get out of Afghanistan as the president and the U.S. military approached this deadline. We heard the president put the deaths of these U.S. service members yesterday in the context of the loss of his own son, Beau Biden, who had served in the U.S. military in Iraq before later dying of brain cancer. President Biden talking directly to the families of the troops who died yesterday, saying it feels like a black hole in your chest that you're being sucked into. But the president also said this about the ISIS terrorists who carried out the attack.
These ISIS terrorists will not win. We will rescue the Americans who are there. We will get our Afghan allies out, and our mission will go on. America will not be intimidated, and I have the utmost confidence in our brave service members who continue to execute this mission with courage and honor.
President Biden also said that he will go after those ISIS-K terrorists at a time and place of the U.S.'s choosing. I think that's an acknowledgement of the fact that this is going to be far more difficult in the future than it has been in the past to actually track down terrorists in Afghanistan, given the fact that we are not going to have the kind of intelligence assets, military assets on the ground, if and when the U.S. is actually able to figure out who was behind yesterday's attacks and try to go after them.
Okay, Josh, let me turn to Ali. Some critical reactions on Capitol Hill, particularly from Republicans. What are you hearing from lawmakers?
Yeah, Vicki, it was a day of somber reactions and high tensions, because you have to remember that for many of these lawmakers, they have constituents who have ties in some way to the region. They have been hearing from people in their local offices asking for help. How can they get people out? How can they help expedite this process? And then for some, it's even a layer deeper. Some of these lawmakers, veterans themselves, who've served in this very region that we are all talking about, some of them including Congressman Brian Mast, who lost both legs during his service in Afghanistan. His tweet yesterday saying, "It's hard to describe the rage I have towards those who chose to kill my brothers and President Biden who enabled them." On the other side of the aisle, Congressman Jason Crow, his interviews yesterday focusing on, as they have been, the importance of this evacuation, getting it done as quickly as possible, but also staying until it's finished. Of course, that's the conversation that's been happening around that August 31st deadline. But Crow also talking about the friends of his who he has that are working at these gates where the evacuations are happening. Again, just hammering home how personal this is. It's not just a foreign policy question. It's deeply personal for a lot of these lawmakers. Now, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer on the Democratic side both have been briefed by the Pentagon Secretary. They said as much yesterday. And on the Hill, just as at the White House, we're going to see flags lowered to half staff in honor of these fallen service members.
Yeah, you're right. It is deeply personal for people on both sides of the aisle. Josh, so the U.S. and other allies warned of a possible attack only hours before it actually happened. So are officials expecting more in the coming days? I think that's always been a concern. And how are they actually trying to mitigate the risk and get everyone out?
Well, unfortunately, they are. They say that this threat remains very active, even following the attack we saw yesterday. And in the last 72 hours or so that the Biden administration will still be doing this evacuation, they are absolutely bracing for the possibility of additional attacks, with General McKenzie, who runs U.S. Central Command, calling the threat from ISIS extremely real. But here's the thing. They're also reliant at this point on the Taliban to run that security for that perimeter around the airport where the U.S. is operating. There was clearly a breakdown there where the Taliban, as they do their initial screening, was not able to catch these folks who were able to make it through. And now we know the U.S. military is trying to figure out how they can beef up the system. They have their own internal security within that perimeter to make sure, or at least try to prevent, anything like this from happening in the final hours we're in Afghanistan.
Still a lot of danger ahead. Josh and Ali, thank you so much for your reporting out of D.C. this morning.
As we said, ISISK is believed to be responsible for conducting the deadly attack at Kabul airport. The name is familiar to some, but for many, it is brand new.
NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell explains the origins of this offshoot group of the Islamic State.
U.S. officials have been warning for days about the threat from ISIS-K, culminating in a red alert last night for Americans to stay away from the airport gates. A warning that proved all too true today. What is ISIS-K? An offshoot in Afghanistan of the Islamic State that originated in Iraq, created 6 years ago in Pakistan, an avowed enemy of the U.S. and rival to the Taliban.
ISIS is extremely real. We've been talking about this for several days. We saw it actually manifest itself here in the last few hours.
Thousands of hardcore Islamic State commanders were released from jails across Afghanistan by the Taliban in recent weeks, since the Taliban takeover easily melding into the teeming masses in Kabul. Only yesterday, the Secretary of State warned it was a high-risk threat.
We're operating in a hostile environment in a city and country now controlled by the Taliban, with the very real possibility of an ISIS-K attack.
And ISIS-K isn't the only terror threat. The Taliban has named the leader of its most radical branch, the Haqqani network, to be in charge of security in Kabul. Khalil Haqqani, a $5 million U.S. bounty on his head, brazenly showing up at Friday prayers in Kabul last week. And the Haqqanis have strong ties to al-Qaeda, also in the mix. What's clear is that the Taliban either couldn't defend against today's bombings or won't. Now the question is, how will the president deliver the forceful response he's promised after the U.S. withdraws? Vicki and Joe.
All right. Thank you, Andrea. And as you just mentioned, the Taliban is now coming under fresh scrutiny in the wake of these attacks. The group's new self-proclaimed head of security is wanted by the U.S. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney joins us now. So, Ken, what more can you tell us about who this man is and how he became the Taliban's head of security?
Good morning, Joe. As you heard Andrea report there, his name is Khalil Haqqani, and he is the brother of the founder of the Haqqani network. And that's a virulent group in Afghanistan. It's sort of like an organized crime family responsible for kidnapping many Americans held for ransom and for the deaths of Americans and many, many Afghans. This is a group that is part of the Taliban, but also has close ties to al-Qaeda. And for that reason, the Haqqani network has been designated a terrorist organization by the United States, which the Taliban never was. And this man, Khalil Haqqani, who's now the head of security in Kabul, he is also a wanted terrorist, as Andrea reported, with a $5 million U.S. reward on his head. Now, he told Al Jazeera that the Taliban is ready to provide security for the Afghan people. Obviously, the events of yesterday suggest that the Taliban and Khalil Haqqani may not be up to the job right now.
So, Ken, as we've been reporting, after the Taliban seized power, the group released thousands of prisoners from Afghan jails. Do we know, could that have played any role in yesterday's attacks? And does the Taliban regret that decision?
In fact, Joe, two Taliban officials told our local correspondent in Kabul that, yes, they do regret the way they handled those prison breaks. There were a lot of Taliban prisoners that they wanted to free, but in the course of that, they released hundreds of ISIS-K fighters, including, they said, bomb makers with a lot of expertise in terrorist attacks, and that may be coming back to haunt them right now. ISIS-K is a rival of the Taliban and is more extreme than the Taliban and is believed to have carried out that bombing yesterday and has now given the U.S. counterterrorism authorities a huge fight on their hands.
And Ken, one of the big questions to come out of all this seems to be, can the Taliban be trusted to carry out an investigation into these attacks?
Well, I think the answer is no, but thankfully the United States government is not relying on the Taliban to do that. There are indications that U.S. intelligence officials already know who some of the people are who carried out those attacks, and they are planning to target them. But, Joe, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do counterterrorism strikes in Afghanistan with no embassy and no military footprint. Most of the CIA officers who are on the ground there have left, and many of our intelligence capabilities are gone. We still have some, and we still have some capability to do what they call standoff strikes. But there are going to be drones flying from far away in the Persian Gulf, which means less time over target. A lot of challenges ahead, Joe.
Such an important point moving forward. Ken, thanks for your reporting. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Despite the deadly attacks in Kabul, Allied forces are still evacuating people at a breakneck pace.
Now, the White House says more than 12,000 people were flown out of the airport in the past 24 hours, even after the suicide bombings and shooting. We want to bring in Matt Bradley now, NBC News foreign correspondent. He is at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, and also Clint Watts, NBC News national security analyst. He's also a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Matt, you're at the American base that has the largest population outside of the U.S. How are military personnel there handling the thousands of evacuees coming in from Kabul?
Well, now, as of today or as of last night, they're completely overwhelmed. They've really ramped up their efforts. And in fact, it wasn't just the uniformed service members. It was their wives and their husbands, their spouses, their children were participating in building what turned into a massive tent city, more than 300 tents to house what maximum capacity was 17,000 Afghan evacuees. And from our understanding yesterday, and this is information we got before this attack, was yesterday was the busiest day in terms of intake, and that now they're at capacity, which means that this base behind me is probably not really going to be taking a lot more people anymore. They're going to have to find other destinations. That could be Italy, and could be southeastern Europe or somewhere else in Europe. Of course, there are U.S. bases dotted all over Europe, and so none of them are nearly as big as Ramstein behind me. It's really interesting because it's a very unusual site here. You can see from where I am the tent city, and you can also see something that you would normally never see here, commercial airlines. There's Delta, United, they're parked and taxiing here amongst the C-17 and C-7 aircraft. They're the ones who are taking Afghans from here onward to the United States. But the problem is that this is still kind of a bottleneck, even though I've heard from a lot of officials that they've doubled the speed with which they're processing Afghan evacuees here in just the last couple of days. Now, like I said, 17,000 are here. There were since this crisis began, more than 70 aircraft have landed, but only 18 have taken off, just to give you a sense of the backlog. Now, one of the challenges they're facing here, guys, there are 10 to 15 unaccompanied minors who showed up here. That number, that's something to listen to. That number is probably going to go up. Children, basically, who have no parents, who somehow managed to make their way onto these flights, made it through Qatar and Doha, and are now here. It's a massive headache for the State Department. Vicky, Joe?
All right, Clint, let's bring you in here and talk about what happened leading up to this attack. The day before yesterday, the U.S. Embassy issued this terror threat warning for the airport, specifically saying U.S. citizens who are at the Abbey Gate, East Gate, or North Gate now should leave immediately. And then yesterday, the suicide bombing happened at the Abbey Gate entrance. How did U.S. intelligence so really precisely predict that location and what was going to happen?
my assumption is that they have not completely lost all of their intelligence sources, and this is probably a human intelligence tip that came in. Also, remember, we have lots of allied partners. There's several countries on the ground, the UK in particular. They are very good at their intel process, and they're very linked in with the United States. So it could be possible that a foreign partner who has a very highly placed source inside the ISIS-K got a tip to it, or it could be in the U.S. networks, the same situation, or a signals intercept, meaning most of the communications, or many of them, amongst these extremists on the ground are not encrypted, they're not protected, and they can be intercepted. And just remember, we have been there for over 2 decades. We still have pretty extensive networks there, I'm sure. While it's not what it is, as of 5 years ago, let's say, we've definitely drawn down. We're not completely absent from the country either.
That human intelligence vital. Clint, we're seeing firsthand the deadly risks U.S. forces and our international partners are facing. So how do they respond and do their jobs under these threats where everything that's happening is so volatile and we're starting to lose some of that human intelligence on the ground?
Yeah, speed is security. I think you heard the president and some others say that yesterday, and they are correct. At this point, it's to stay on pace and keep those evacuations going as quickly as possible. Every minute that the Americans are there at that air base, it becomes a magnet for terrorist attacks. What we also know is ISIS-K has many operatives that are out there. They have essentially moved to Kabul because they know this is the place where they can inflict harm and raise their profile. Remember, part of doing a spectacular terrorist attack like this is to get it out into the media, to try and rally more people to their cause, to try and draw more recruits in. So this is a window of opportunity from ISIS-K's perspective to cause harm both to the U.S. and the Taliban, 2 enemies of ISIS-K.
Clint Watts and Matt Bradley, thank you so much for the reporting there. U.S. allies and nations bordering Afghanistan are on high alert after yesterday's deadly terror attacks in Kabul. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now from Beijing to walk us through how the international community is handling these developments. Janice, how are U.S. allies reacting to this terror attack in Kabul against U.S. troops and Afghan civilians?
Well, they're reacting with shock, disgust, heartache over the attacks. The airport in Kabul had already become so emblematic of what had gone wrong in Afghanistan, and then tragedy upon tragedy. The U.S. and NATO have said that it's now a priority to finish those evacuations, but condolences and condemnations are pouring in. France's Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron saying that all of France shares in the grief with victims' families. Canada's Prime Minister called it a difficult day for Afghans and people around the world who have long been deeply committed to a better future for Afghanistan. The UK confirmed it did not suffer any casualties among its soldiers or embassy staff who were close to where the explosions happened. The UK has now officially ended its evacuations. Here is British Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
There were going to be particular vulnerabilities to terrorism, to opportunistic terrorist attacks. We condemn them. I think they're despicable. But I'm afraid that there's something that we've had to prepare for.
Importantly, the attacks were also denounced by the Taliban. Now, the group has long had ties to extremist groups, but it does have sworn enemies, too. The Taliban spokesperson made a point of saying that the explosions happened in an area where the U.S. was responsible for security. They are going to launch an investigation. In the meantime, former Afghan Prime Minister Hamid Karzai called the attacks a crime against humanity.
Janice, speaking of the Taliban, you have been reporting on the relationship between Beijing and the developing Taliban government in Kabul. How is the Chinese government reacting to this attack? Have they said anything, and how do they plan to respond moving forward?
Well, they did. Today, they condemned the attacks that happened and said they're urging everyone involved to have a smooth transition in Afghanistan. A spokesperson today said China resolutely opposes and strongly condemns all forms of terrorism and is willing to work with the international community to cope with the threat of terrorism and prevent Afghanistan from becoming a source of terrorism again. And this is, of course, the concern that's reverberating around the region. China had already been laying the groundwork to have friendly relations with the Taliban. Baradar was here for talks last month and gave security assurances to Chinese officials that it would not allow its fighters to use Afghan territory as a base to launch attacks inside of China. Beijing is fearful of extremism, particularly in the western part of the country in Xinjiang. It has used the threat of terrorism as justification for a crackdown on Uyghurs and other minorities and detention centers that held up to a million people. What the attacks in Kabul expose now is that security assurances from the Taliban are only going to go so far in terms of protection. So for China, it's now facing not only an extremist group taking over a neighboring country, but also the potential for the so-called inspiration effect, where other groups feel emboldened by the Taliban's success, as we saw with these attacks by ISISK.
China will be watching carefully, so will the rest of the world. Janice, thank you so much.
A lot more still to come. Another tropical storm gaining strength and targeting the Gulf Coast. Our Bill Cairns is tracking Ida, set to make landfall this weekend.
We just can't get a break. Plus, a showdown over masking up. The growing debate over COVID protocols in Tennessee. That's next.
Louisiana is now under a state of emergency. Tropical storm Ida posing a serious threat this weekend to the state's coastlines.
Bill Cairns has been very busy lately. Good morning. What can you tell us about this storm, Bill?
Yeah, this is a serious threat, maybe as serious as it gets. Louisiana was hit 3 times by a hurricane last year and a tropical storm. And here they go again. I mean, they just have horrendous luck in the last 2 seasons. So Ida right now, it's a weak tropical storm, but that is all expected to change. It's going to travel over some of the warmest water on the planet over the next 60 hours before landfall, and it should only get stronger and stronger and stronger right up until landfall. So it should become a hurricane Saturday afternoon. The Hurricane Center brings it up to a Category 2 100-mile-per-hour winds just after midnight Saturday night into Sunday. Landfall expected as a Category 3 major hurricane just south of New Orleans down near Homa, and that would be 115-mile-per-hour winds. Landfall expected sometime maybe late afternoon or early evening Sunday, and then the storm rains itself out and slowly moves through the southeast. So what does all this mean? Well, we think we have pretty excellent agreement on where the storm is heading. Almost all of our computer models are taking this into south central or southeastern portions of Louisiana. That would put New Orleans on the dirty side of the storm and very susceptible to storm surge. We have hurricane watches that are in effect, of course, with the anticipation of the storm. And here's the 2 biggest issues. Storm surge, 7 to 11 feet, a wall of water coming into southeast Louisiana, including the east side of New Orleans. Hopefully the retaining walls will hold. And then on top of that, guys, an anticipated 8 to 16 inches of rain with an isolated totals of 20 inches of rain. You can just imagine those pumps in New Orleans are going to be tested. We're going to have extensive power outages and a real threat to lives with that 7 to 11-foot storm surge.
Wow. All right. We know you'll keep an eye on it, Bill. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bill. Well, the Supreme Court delivered a major blow to the Biden administration late last night, ruling the CDC does not have the authority to enforce a federal eviction moratorium during the COVID pandemic. The court issued an 8-page unsigned majority opinion saying, quote, if a federally imposed eviction moratorium is to continue, Congress must specifically authorize it. The 3 liberal judges on the court dissented in the decision, arguing the public interest strongly favors the moratorium as the Delta variant spreads. The White House says it is disappointed by the ruling, and it's calling for action to prevent evictions. Millions of people are now at risk of losing their homes as a result of this ruling. And at the same time, just 11% of the funds allocated by the government to help renters has actually been distributed.
A school district in Tennessee is back in the spotlight as officials expand their temporary mask mandate there. Williamson County is an affluent county just outside of Nashville. School board meeting there went viral earlier this month as videos showed parents heckling, even threatening people over masks. Well, on Thursday, people showed up again to protest the mask mandate.
Masks do not stop the spread of this virus. It only stops the spread of friendship and learning and communication that is effective.
Walking around in Tennessee, I see people with masks on, like, no offense, but I question, if you believe in the gospel, I question your faith. Amen. And if you don't believe in the gospel, I question your intelligence and your instinct.
Your job as school board members is to manage education only. Parents are responsible for children's health. Parents' rights have been violated.
All right, NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns was there last night. This morning, she's outside Fairview Middle School. So, Dasha, the Williamson County School Board voted to include middle and high schools in the mandate now. It was already in place for the elementary schools there. Tell us what happened at the meeting yesterday and what you're hearing from school officials about this debate.
Yeah, Joe, the sound you just played there was a pretty good representation of what we heard last night. I think we've all watched as school board meetings have become the latest venue for culture wars, for political division. And last night was no exception to that. Security was out in full force because of what happened the last time, what we all saw in those viral videos. They did keep the situation under control, but I'll tell you, the tension in that room was extremely high. The majority of people there against masks, the few people that were for them were derided and booed after they spoke. A lot of anger at school board members, at the superintendent. People making the argument about parental choice, saying that schools shouldn't be making health decisions for their kids. But what school officials are saying in response to that is that schools have always had the responsibility of taking care of students' health when they're on campus. And they're extremely worried about the rapid rise of COVID-19 here. We've seen a 40% increase in just 4 days in COVID cases in this district, and more numbers we're going to get today. I spoke to one of the school board members and asked him what this actually means for the kids, because at the end of the day, it is all about them. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I don't think it's good for the kids. It's not the example that we should be setting for them. We should be able to disagree without being disagreeable and be civil to each other, respect one another's opinions. Even if we look at the same set of facts, we analyze it and come to different conclusions.
And Joe, Fairview Middle School actually had to shut down earlier this month because they simply did not have enough staff. And school officials are worried that that's going to happen to more schools. They think it's going to get worse before it gets better here, Joe.
Dasha, you also spoke with a doctor last night who showed up to support the mask mandate. Describe what happened during your conversation.
Yeah, we were talking to folks as they were waiting in line to get into the building before the event. We spoke to a local doctor here, and during our interview, which was only 5 minutes or so, we were interrupted multiple times by folks who derided the doctor, questioned her medical expertise. I want you to see just a small moment there. Take a listen.
What do you mean by medical tyranny?
Excuse me, I gotta go. We don't have rights anymore, that's what it means. We literally have come up with an incredibly safe and efficacious vaccine, and people don't want to accept it. There's little to no side effects. It's very effective, and people are behind me screaming about how it's tyranny and it's communism, and it's silly is what it is. I mean, literally, they've got a doctor here telling them how safe it is.
Joe, Dr. Meredith Duke says she has 2 kids of her own who were recently exposed to COVID-19, and she says that her hospital is at a breaking point. To say that she's frustrated with the climate in her community right now is an understatement, guys.
And despite all that, she continues to show up at those meetings to get her point across. Dasha, thanks so much for your reporting. Appreciate it.
Wow. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. Dr. Azar, so good to see you this morning. Let's start with some of these arguments that we are hearing at these anti-mask protests like the one Dasha just covered. Masks have been recommended now for a year and a half. What, if anything, can public health officials really do to change people's minds? You heard the doctor right there, and people are shouting her down, calling it medical tyranny.
Well, good morning, guys. You know, honestly, I watched that piece, and for one of the first times, I really had sort of this visceral reaction, this just really upset, you know, that there is just this 2 divided groups in this country. And, you know, I just have to remind everyone that there is absolutely no evidence that masks do any physical harm to children, and there's an overabundance of evidence that they can mitigate the spread. of coronavirus. And, you know, to me, it's just so disheartening, as the doctor was pointing out, we have two major tools for prevention: vaccines and masks. And masks are non-invasive, they are cheap, and they are effective. And, you know, a little known fact, I think it kind of flew under the radar, is that the CDC updated guidance a few weeks ago stating that if all children were masked in a school and other mitigation strategies were followed, if there was an exposure, the kids don't need to quarantine. Now, this is not universally across the country. Localities can make their own decisions about that. But if your goal is to maintain the viability of a school or a business, you want to implement masks. And I think that that's just a message that was kind of missed the last year and a half. If your business wants to stay open, if your school wants to stay open, do the masking. But it's a head scratcher, Vicki. I really have no other really good explanation for you for how this is still going on a year and a half later.
Doctor, we have some more misinformation to report for you. Our colleagues, Ben Collins and Brandy Zadrozny, have done some phenomenal reporting on a new telemedicine website that they say was founded by a woman who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. They found that anti-vaccination groups on Facebook and Reddit have been directing people to that site for false COVID cures like ivermectin. For those who may not remember, that's the animal dewormer that the CDC has been warning people against.
So, yeah, it was an absolutely excellent report. Very, very thorough. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in learning about this or has questions about ivermectin to please read it. You know, I think that the piece highlighted two major phenomena that have happened during this pandemic. And one is really the terrifying proliferation and amplification of misinformation and disinformation on social media websites, Facebook, Reddit, things like that. And secondly, and very, very importantly, it highlights what we've seen now, and that is medicine and science in the pandemic era, where you're taking, unfortunately, in many cases, poor quality studies that haven't been, peer reviewed, that are being reported out to the public, and people are making their own, or interpreting them and action. I can't even talk this morning, and doing things with this information that is unfortunately, hasn't been validated and hasn't been substantiated by the scientific community. And I think that that's a very, very, very dangerous mix. And with ivermectin in particular, poison control centers have seen, 5 times the number of calls as opposed to pre-pandemic eras. Retail pharmacies have dispensed thousands upon thousands of prescriptions for this medicine that, yes, in humans at small doses is used as an anti-parasite, and as you mentioned, a dewormer for livestock. It has absolutely no benefit in COVID-19. It's being studied, but currently there is no gold standard randomized control trial that shows that it has any benefit and can definitely do harm.
And that is what people need to consider, is where they're getting their information, hopefully from diverse sources. Dr. Azar, thank you so much. All right, coming up, junk food lovers, this one's for you. Yeah, Flamin' Hot Cheetos and Mountain Dew are coming together for a spicy, sweet, and yes, strange combination. How you can get your hands on this limited time. Oh, it's a drink. Oh, yes, that's next it's a drink. Morning No
News
orange
Now.
fingers, Joe.
If you're one of the lucky ones who has tickets to see Harry Styles in concert, better make sure you're prepared, because there are some new rules that are a sign of the times. Get it? Yeah. On Wednesday, Team Styles announced that fans with tickets to the upcoming Love On tour must wear masks. Also, you'll have to provide either proof of vaccination or proof of a negative COVID test within 48 hours prior to entering the arena. The newly minted Grammy winner is the latest musician to have mask and vaccination requirements for their concerts. With the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant, other artists like BTS and Stevie Nicks have scrapped their tour dates altogether for now. Styles' tour kicks off on September 4th in Nevada and ends in November in California. So,
well, look, Joe, don't you think that's sort of a solution? Look, would you rather have no Harry Styles or wear a mask and see Harry Styles? Exactly. I mean, I know there's a lot of functions right now that are saying, hey, we're going to try and push forward with this thing, whether it's a concert, whether it's conferences, but we're going to have vaccines and we're going to have masks too, just to play it safe. Dr. Ashish Jha, who was out there yesterday talking about the Sturgis motorcycle rally and saying, look, we can have large gatherings, but if you have vaccination, proof of vaccination, masking, distancing, if you can keep it outside, those are the safest ways to do these things. Absolutely. All right, Joe, thank you. Well, in our ever-changing virtual world, in some places you can now order a taxi that will pick you up without a driver. And how about this? You can log on to a video conference meeting and get all the details without even being at your computer. What does that mean? We're going to show you in this week's edition of Good to Know. Could your next taxi be driverless? Would you trust it? Well, you can hitch a ride with a robo-driver. Waymo is introducing a new robo-taxi service. A limited number of self-driving vehicles will be available in the San Francisco area. You just hail the cab from your phone and get this, your ride is free for now. That service is only available to select riders who sign up. So to try it out, you got to download the Waymo One app and say you want to join the pilot program. The company has not commented on when it will expand to other cities or just how long this pilot phase will last. Be on a virtual meeting without actually being available? This sounds a little like cheating. A company called Otter AI is rolling out a feature that will automatically log you into virtual meetings even if you're not there. The feature will also transcribe the meeting's audio so you can read it later. The company says it will be available on Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, and other platforms for $20 a month. If you have a Fitbit, it might be time to upgrade. Fitbit unveiled a new model this week with some big design changes. The Charge 5 will be larger than previous models with a rounded screen and a new LED display, among other features. The new fitness tracker will be available in September. Do the do and feel the burn. I'm not sure if your taste buds are ready for this. Mountain Dew coming out with a new flavor inspired by flaming hot Cheeto snacks. The new combo is set to come out on August 31st. It will only be available through Mountain Dew's online store while supplies last. The good news here? No Cheeto fingers with that drink. Joe, would you try it?
But how does it taste?
That's what I'm wondering.
I mean, I'll try anything, but...
I like that attitude.
Yeah, well, not anything, but I'll try with some Fireball and go at it. All right,
there you go.
Coming up, college students struggling more than a year into the pandemic.
Yeah, up next, a look at how learning loss is impacting their education and what's being done to offer students more support. Stay with us.
School officials know learning loss is going to be an issue for college students.
Yeah, and without reliable test scores or grades, they know very little about the incoming freshman class. So they're taking extra measures to make sure students get as much support as possible. Our own Savannah Sellers takes a closer look.
I've never been on campus to learn.
I don't remember what it's like to take a test without using my notes.
I am really not excited to go in person.
After more than a year of online learning, many students are returning to the physical classroom.
I could definitely say that the nerve of going back into a classroom is going to be there.
We spoke to Andrew Labite earlier this year. He told us he bent the rules to get by academically.
I know a lot of my friends personally. We're just looking to get the answer and just copy paste the answer to just get the points.
Which is the version that's cheating, right?
Technically, yeah.
I can definitely say that there are some assignments that I should not have gotten the grade that I got on because I had access to Google.
Now he's in his second year at Mizzou and worried about what he didn't learn last year.
I'm going to have my fingers crossed and hope that Calc 3 does not build up too much on Calc 2. And if it does, it's going to be a lot of YouTubing and self-learning and reteaching on everything that I do need to know.
I mean, it sounds like a part-time job of your sophomore year to try to relearn your freshman year.
Pretty much, yeah.
For incoming freshmen, college is a big transition no matter what, let alone after a year plus of virtual learning. How do you feel?
I'm really nervous, but I'm also really excited because it gives me an opportunity to get back what I lost my senior year.
The last time Jessica Aloba sat in a physical classroom, she was a junior in high school back in early 2020.
So do you think you learned as much last year in an online format as you would have in a classroom?
I definitely don't. It definitely took away a lot of the advantages that in-person gives. I feel like I definitely learned a lot less than I would have in person.
Now, Jessica's starting her first semester of college at the University of Kansas.
Whenever I think about coming to class and being taken off guard by a question or a professor directly calling on me in order to answer, I definitely feel a lot of that anxiety.
Have you been practicing in your head?
Oh, definitely a lot, all the time.
To combat what some are calling a lost year, colleges are beefing up their tutoring services, identifying ways students can help each other. Sacramento State's using federal relief money to double the number of supplemental courses taught by upperclassmen. They're offered in subjects with high failure rates, like science and math. At UC Riverside, officials are expanding a text message-based peer mentoring program launched during the pandemic to help new students adjust.
Was there ever a time that you thought, maybe I'm just not going to go to college, or maybe not right now?
It was definitely up in the air.
Jessica credits the University of Kansas for stepping in with scholarships and resources to convince her to enroll. She participated in their Early Start program, which gave her more time to get used to campus life.
Is this culture shock to be on a college campus?
Definitely. Just immediately as I got out of the car and I was loading up my dorm, the amount of people that I saw just stepping off is more than I saw for the majority of my school year, senior year.
Up next, he's going public after months in hiding.
Now, the police lieutenant who shot and killed a woman during the Capitol riot is sharing his story.
I believe I showed the utmost courage on January 6th, and it's time for me to do that now.
More of his exclusive interview with our own Lester Holt about what happened that day next on Morning News Now.
7 U.S. Capitol police officers are suing former President Trump and members of far-right extremist groups for their alleged role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Many of the officers on duty during the attack are still struggling to cope with the fallout.
That includes the lieutenant that fatally shot Ashley Babbitt while defending the House chambers. He revealed his identity to Nightly News anchor Lester Holt for the first time last night in an exclusive interview.
Vicki and Joe, the identity of the U.S. Capitol police officer who shot and killed Ashley Babbitt while defending the Capitol on January 6th has been withheld by authorities. But those angered by his actions have been guessing at his identity online and on social media. And he has faced a barrage of threats ever since the incident. Now, in an NBC News exclusive, he steps out of the shadows. Were you afraid that day?
I was very afraid.
Are you afraid now? Going forward?
I am afraid because I know there's people that disagree with my actions on January the 6th. But I hope they understand I did my job. And there was imminent threats and danger to the members of Congress.
In the chaotic minutes before Lieutenant Michael Byrd shot and killed rioter Ashley Babbitt, a cascade of alarming messages crackled through his police radio.
Yells for help and, officer down and screaming as they're being assaulted.
This video from inside the House chamber captures Byrd instructing members of Congress to don gas masks.
We had a disbursement of tear gas in the rotunda.
Then, instructions to prepare for the worst.
I'd ask them to remove their pens, to remove their jackets, to look like staff as much as possible, and to seek shelter by staying down below their chairs.
Soon, a horde of demonstrators stormed up the stairs to the House chamber.
There's a gun! Hey, he's got a gun! He's got a gun!
Byrd is seen taking a defensive posture with his gun drawn.
I didn't even realize I had been yelling and screaming as loud as I was. Please stop, get back, stop.
We see your arm out there for a considerable amount of time. Yes. Were you wavering?
I was, again, taking a tactical stance. You're ultimately hoping that your commands will be complied with, and unfortunately they were not.
What did you think this individual was doing at that moment?
She was posing a threat to United States House of Representatives.
But an attorney for Ashley Babbitt's family disputes that. He did not respond to our request for a comment, but in a previous statement said Babbitt was not brandishing a weapon, not in close proximity to members of Congress, and was not an imminent threat of death or serious injury to anyone. Based on your training, in that case, does it matter that the person was armed or not?
According to law, it does not. I know based on my training and my policy, what I did was appropriate.
Multiple investigations have now upheld Byrd's actions on January 6th. Have you continued to question your actions that day?
I knew that day. I followed my training, and I spent countless years preparing for such a moment. You ultimately hope that moment never occurs, but you prepare as best you can. I know that day I saved countless lives.
If Ashley Babbitt's family is watching this, is there anything you would say to them?
What I would like to say is to all the families from January the 6th that their family members receive injury or loss of life, as my heart goes out to them. I'm sorry for their loss and what they're dealing with. And I pray that they find peace and comfort.
Lieutenant Byrd says he still loves his job and looks forward to returning to it. Vicki and Joe.
Thank you, Lester. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now. The news continues right now.